The next speaker is Martin Fleming. He's a Vedanta philosopher. A short introduction before he begins his talk. Martin Fleming is a Vaishnava Vedanta theologian, originally from Belfast, Northern Ireland. He has served as the principal of Bhaktivedanta Manor near Watford, the director of Buckland Hall in Wales, a member of the Central Religious Advisory Committee for the BBC, and as a trustee of the Faith Authority for the Avanti Hindu Schools in the UK. Martin Fleming specializes in the integration of modern science and the philosophies of Vedanta, Sankhya, and Yoga. Currently, he is the director of the Science and Philosophy Initiative, a UK association, and board member of the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies in USA. He is best known for his regular broadcast on the BBC since 1989. So the title of his talk today is Triad Framework of Consciousness, a philosophical framework uniting science and spirituality derived from Vedic knowledge systems. So with a short introduction, I welcome you. And you have next 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, Deepa. I'm glad you clarified that it's a talk and not going to be interpretive dance. Because we very much enjoyed what we just seen, and I don't want to spoil that. Thank you. Anyway, I'm very pleased to be here, and it's been quite some time since we were first notified of this event. So it's wonderful that it's come together here in Winterthur, and all our thanks and appreciation to those who have been organising the day for us today. It's been absolutely fantastic. I'm going to speak on my favourite topic, consciousness. As a kind of philosopher steeped in Vedanta philosophy, consciousness is naturally of interest to me. And I spend a lot of my time these days talking between philosophers and scientists. I'm hoping to make philosophers more aware of science and be more science literate, and I'm hoping to make more scientists philosophically literate, because the two disciplines overlap so much, and particularly on the big issues that still provide mysteries for us, of which consciousness is an important one. So, I'm going to present to you the Triad Framework for Consciousness, which is a philosophical framework uniting science and spirituality, and derived from the Vedic knowledge system, particularly Vedanta, Sankhya, and Yoga. But I'd like to start with a question for each of you. Something that I'd like you to answer for yourself. What's the most important thing about my life, your life? What's the most important thing? Quickly, a few words, as Ruby did. Spirituality? Happiness. Existence. Good health. Family. Air. Very good. Love. Those are the good things, and they all depend on my existence, isn't it? None of those would be important unless I was aware that I exist, and that my existence gives me the opportunity to experience. Existence, experience, and the fact that I have this first-person perspective. It's me who is conscious. It's me who's experiencing. It's me who's feeling the value of existing and living and being. And then all the other things that are in my life can be important because I experience them, I enjoy them, I love them. So consciousness is at the heart of everything. And it's something we are already aware of, we already understand. It exists. It's real stuff. So this presentation is going to take you through some of the components of conscious experience. And it's going to show you that these belong in a framework which is non-reductive, meaning that it looks beyond the physical. It looks beyond what can be done with the ordinary mainstream science into other areas that need exploration. And this will address, clarify some of the potential that exists within consciousness for scientific research. And it will also, you will recognize that this framework helps to accommodate a lot of aspects of what we sometimes call anomalous or paranormal or psychic phenomena, which people think, well, are those real? Can those exist? Can they work? Well, actually, if you understand the framework that is needed to explain consciousness, you can see how these fit in. And you'll also feel that in this picture, it accommodates very happily my spiritual aspirations and my abilities to develop myself in spiritual life without any conflict with issues of naturalism and of science. So, the components of conscious experience. I've got this, I like this phrase by John Searle. He's a philosopher, American philosopher. I probably don't agree with him on anything else. But this is a very good summary of what is the challenge when it comes to explaining consciousness. I attended a conference just a couple of months ago, the Association for the Scientific Study of Consciousness, it was in New York University. Big 700 of the top neuroscientists, philosophers involved. And everyone saying, I've got a theory for consciousness, I've got a theory, my theory explains this, you know. And it was very frustrating because their theories didn't deal with this subject here, that the essential trait of consciousness... Okay, we're all right, we're good. This is, okay. That their theories, their ideas didn't address this statement by John Searle, that the essential trait of consciousness that we need to explain is unified, subjective, unified qualitative subjectivity. Unified, me, I'm the one person. Qualitative, I'll come to in a minute. Subjectivity means that I am seeing the world from being me. Now, Christoph Koch, who worked with Francis Crick, did this analysis, and I find it very useful. And it was actually with Ram Gopal's charts, he did something very similar. That let's analyze what is happening in experience. We have a picture of the external world, a guy walking his dog in the park. Light is bouncing off it. It's entering into the eyes of our person here. This is sensory processing. Light coming into the eyes, being turned into electricity, isn't it? It's turned into electricity and goes into our brain. Back here, the visual processing cortex. So there, you see it as data, it's electricity. And then Christoph Koch draws this, that somehow or other, from that activity in the brain, we get the picture of this little dog. Now, that's a big question. This brings into question, how is it that what our brain has got is electricity, but what we are seeing is an image? Now you might be thinking, well, of course I'm seeing an image because it's out there. That's the world. I'm seeing the world. But wait a minute, you have no connection with the world. Your only connection with the world is the light that's bouncing off it into your eye. And it's going into your brain, and it's just electricity there. Why are you seeing the world as a picture with forms, with colors, with movements? Why are you seeing it like that, like a movie in your head? That's the hard problem. And this introduces us to the issue of what is called qualia. Qualia are the qualities of our inner experience. Because the world has lots of properties and qualities. But we are experiencing the world inside our minds. And the ways we experience the world in our minds has its own qualities. The redness of red. That is different to the blueness of blue.
These are qualities. Color is a quality we're experiencing inside our minds. It is actually being generated by our minds. Let me just give you one little experiment which you might have done as a kid. Do you ever do this thing with your fingers? You just put your fingers about an inch or so apart, just in front of your eyes. Try it now for yourself. Do you see a floating finger in front of you? A bit further apart, a little further so that you're able to see. You can move them. Do you see there's a floating finger? You're looking through it. Yeah? See the little floating, not one that they can't be touching, they've got to be apart. You know, not too far apart. I said an inch or so apart, an inch, it's about that much, a couple of centimeters, and you see a floating thing. Move it closer to your eye if you need to. Has everyone seen it? Good. You just saw something that doesn't exist. Is there a floating finger moving about in the room? No. But you saw it. Your experience of it is a real experience. But you know it doesn't exist out there. So where does that floating finger, that picture of a floating finger exist? It exists in the mind. Now that's interesting. You see, we're used to thinking we're seeing the outside world. But now we actually have to realize what I'm seeing is inside my mind. And my mind has these qualities of qualia. So qualia are real. They're the only thing you ever experience about the world. What your senses send electricity to your brain. And then you experience the feel of that. So they're real even when they are illusory. And a simple example, we can't go into this in great detail today, but a simple example is color. We're usually taught that color is related to the electromagnetic spectrum and that color, a different wavelength of light is a different color. Isn't that the usual story? Wrong. Electricity wavelengths do not have any color whatsoever. The color is imposed or given to you in your mind. Isaac Newton, who did a lot of work on spectra, looked at these and said, well, if every wavelength is a different color, where's magenta? Which wavelength is magenta? Doesn't exist. But you'll say, magenta is a mixture of blue and red. It's mixed, isn't it? When you have red light and blue light, you'll see magenta. So does that explain it in scientific terms? No. Because where does the mixing take place? You can't mix two wavelengths and get a new one. Physics doesn't work like that. Right? And the wavelength related to red and the wavelength related to blue are dealt with by different cells in your eyes. So they're not mixed outside in the world. They're not mixed in your eye. Separate signals go to the brain. Does the brain mix them? And how does the brain produce a color? Where in your brain is this color, the picture? If we cut it open, we're going to find it? No, I don't think so. So that means that you've got qualia, you've got mental experiences, qualities, which cannot be explained in anything to do with the physics of the outside world or the biology of how your senses and brain process it. They are different. Qualia correlate with what's going on in the brain, but not exactly. You see these two squares, A and B. Are they the same shade of grey? Do they look the same shade of grey? No, they don't. But they are. Now that you know that there are, will you see them the same? No. Your mind's still tricking you, but they actually should be the same. So they correlate, but not exactly. And it's subjective. You know this one, right? All right, hands up. Black and blue. Hands up, gold and white. All right, at the next break, you can go and fight it out outside. So what this tells us is that we have the easy problems. We understand how all this processing of information about the world goes through our senses and goes into our brain. We can do a heck of a lot analyzing that. But the hard problem is explaining how that produces the picture that we see in our minds. And it suggests that the mind is something beyond the brain. It has properties, qualities which are different to what the brain has. It's different to physics. It's a different type of function, different type of properties. And then there's a further problem. That's the hard problem, but there's a bigger problem. That who is the entity, who is the person who is experiencing the picture of the world? That's us. We said at the beginning, we are the person who is experiencing stuff. So there is the world, there's our body, there's our brain, there's the stuff in our mind, but the actual act and facility and faculty of being able to observe that is a different quality again. It's a different property. So what this tells us is that we have three categories of components that make up our experience of the world. There's the physical functions, there's the mental, cognitive functions, and there's consciousness functions. Three types. So, putting them in a very simple picture, physical functions, cognitive functions, consciousness functions. And we talk about them as functions and properties. Why? Because science can only work with functions and properties. Science never tells you what something is made of. It tells you that the components have these properties and these functions. What they do, what they look like, how they interact, what are the nature of those interactions. Science doesn't tell you ontology. It doesn't tell you what the world is made of. It does tell you what it does and what it's like. And that is the approach that we recommend for the exploration of science. Explore mind and the observer in terms of its functions and properties. Then we keep away from all this argument. Are we dualists? Are we idealists? How, what is consciousness made of? You can't ask that question because you don't even know what matter is made of. You just know its functions and its properties. So we know this much. Consciousness is real. We just know that. We know it exists. It's the one thing you absolutely know for certain, that. And you experience the stuff in your mind. That's real. Is the world real? That's actually the one that's a question mark, philosophically. But my view is that it does exist. Because it exists, stuff is being experienced in the mind. Because stuff is experienced in the mind, we know consciousness is real. Now, instead of the word observer, I'm going to slip in this word atma, because I think it's a useful one when talking about this subject. I never mentioned soul. The only time I'm going to mention soul is to say I'm not going to mention it. Why? Because people say, well, so where does soul come from? You're making stuff up. And we don't need to make stuff up. We know consciousness exists. It's real. So let's talk about that. We're not making anything up. And we give it the name Atma, the smallest unit composed of and possessing a quantum of consciousness. It's an individual entity of consciousness. We are the seer, the witness, the observer, the knower. These are phrases used in Vedanta a lot. We're the original self. We are non-neural. We are not part of the physical world. We are non-physical. And we know these things interact. Our body and senses react with the world, sensory processing. That's all. We can model that with physical functions. But the mind also connects with that, interprets it, and brings it into the mind. And the Atma, the conscious functions, connects with the mind. So we know these interactions happen. And when you've got things which are each of them real and each of them interact, then you know they are part of a unified ontology. There is something, some aspect of reality that ties it all together. They are all part of the same thing. Matter and spirit are not two really different things. They are connected together, but they have different properties. They function differently. That's the point we're making. And the domain of physical science is to analyze this area. The natural sciences works really well there. However, you should also explore these interactions. And that requires a sort of psychophysical science, which often is regarded with a little bit of disdain by the mainstream. But it shouldn't be, because the world exists and mind exists. They have different functions. They should be explored, how they work together. And the Atma and its link with the mind and the world should be explored through the domain of experiential science. And each of those sciences should have their own rules, should have their own methodologies, should have their own integrity. Now, I'm going to just give you a little bit of a flavor of how these two interact, because it starts to open up quite a bit of ideas of what's going on in this world. In each of these cases, the physical aspects of the world and brain have a sub-physical state. The modern physics is delving deeper and deeper into, the world of particle physics, quantum fields, and wondering what's below that. Are we dealing with string theory? What are we dealing with? What's going on at the depths of physics? So, sub-physical states. We know that the mind has subconscious states. So, both of those, physical and mind, have their subconscious states. And they are linked together by a psychophysical substrate. This is the explanation of Vedanta and Sankhya, that the connection between mind and the world doesn't necessarily take place when they're both manifesting themselves fully, their properties fully, but takes place at the subtle level. And very interesting, at that conference I mentioned in New York, Thomas Nagel, very famous in philosophy of consciousness, he's the one who coined, "What is it like to be a bat?" You may have heard of that one, but it's a really famous one. It's quoted in all the books. He gave a talk and said, actually, you cannot, and he did this to the neuroscientists, and he apologized at the beginning, if what I'm about to tell you doesn't seem to fit with everything you've been talking about in neuroscience and, you're going to explain the hard problem through neurology, you may be disappointed. But he said, blame David Chalmers and the other guys for inviting me to give this talk. So he said, you're not going to connect the brain and the mind together directly. They both link down to a psychophysical substrate. He practically quoted from the Bhagavad Gita on this one. He did. He thought it was his own theory. But that was what it was explaining, that they connect at that level. So therefore the distinction between mind and brain need not be seen as a big issue when we see that they connect. And really what is happening is that there is a flow of information about the world, which flows through these substrate to mind, and it is gathered by the mind. That's how the Vedas explain that the properties, the sensory perceptions that exist out here of what something tastes like, smells like, feels like, touch is like, what it looks like, what it sounds like, is all that's pulled through here, through the Akash, through Shabda, and manifests then as qualia perceptions. So, although mainstream science and neuroscience has no explanation for qualia, if you analyze the world qualitatively, looking at it in a different way, you start to see that there is an explanation that takes in what we experience and how it is gathered from the world. Now, it's not just things are in the mind. The qualia perceptions exist in the mind, but it is the Atma that shines its light on the mind and experiences whatever is in the mind. Whatever the mind is gathering, that's what we experience. But it's not just one-way flow of information. There's another flow going in the opposite direction. And that is initiated by the Atma through will, free will, volition. What I want to do. It generates stuff in the mind, ideas, plans, strategies, desires, all this stuff. And then that sends information through the system and manifests out here. Actions, manifestation, everything we say, do, want, and happens, it starts to go there. That opens up a lot of big questions. The whole, if you like, industry of manifestation actually is borrowed from Vedic truths. That mind can influence the world, can influence your body. Manifestation works, but there's some tricks to it, and most of the way it's been sold through courses do not work. They're just making the teacher very rich, but not you. But you can see that in this system, how does it cross here? For instance, I'm just going to very quickly give a little bit of the science from a philosophy. It was mentioned earlier, I think, by the professor in India about Penrose and Hameroff's theory of orchestrated objective reduction. Now, in that, they say, well, we've got a theory of quantum consciousness. No, but what they have identified, and I spent some time with Stuart Hameroff discussing this with him, that in the brain there actually are examples of quantum states in the microtubules, and these microtubules affect the threshold at which the brain cell fires. You might have thought, well, it's very straightforward for brain cells firing. They get a stimulus and they fire. But the threshold of charge that is needed to make them fire, that threshold can be varied. So what is varying the threshold of your brain cells firing? That's the quantum activity in the microtubules. Now, we know from the work of Princeton University that intention, just pure conscious intention, can influence the behavior of quantum states. We have a very close connection with Brenda Dunn, who ran the Princeton Engineering Anomalous Research for 27 years. They amassed 800,000 experiments showing that overall conscious intention can change the output of quantum devices. So intention can affect quantum states, and if quantum states then affect brain states, you've actually got a connection between mind and the brain. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but it's a route. But we'll move on. So basically what we have then is this two-way traffic. And if you use this model, you can start to see that it is possible for the Atma to experience knowledge in the mind, and that the mind can access knowledge in a number of different ways. Normally, it's sensory inputs being decoded, and the information now being presented in mental format. Usually that's the way. But the mind can actually even draw information about the world from down here. That's a process known as remote viewing or precognitive perception. I've trained in the process of remote viewing that the CIA used, and we run seminars and courses showing how pretty well anyone can draw information about any target distance in time and space without knowing anything about it, without even knowing what the target is in the first place. We can get you to draw information from that, from this subtle physical state we would call, and I'm using a word perhaps differently than you were using the Akash on this one. So draw it back to here. Or the mind can connect with subtle states of mind. Both within ourselves, we can access information that is very deep in our subconscious. Vedanta in this, explains that nothing you have ever experienced in this life is lost. Nothing you've experienced even in any previous life is actually lost. It's just very deep. And it can be accessed. Not just your own mind. You can access the mind of others. I've also done that. Actually, it was, I'd done the Stanford system of remote viewing, but a couple of years ago I got introduced to the Princeton University system of PRP, precognitive remote perception, in which you send someone out into town or wherever, and they're looking at something. And we're sitting here, we connect with their mind, we start to see what they're seeing. And if you, in the right circumstances, I was flabbergasted how accurate and how this really works, for us. So you can gather mind from other minds. And mind is collective. There is collective mind that we're all connecting with. So there's opportunities to derive inspiration, intuition, insights from even the collective mind. So even on this is all on the physical world, all the natural world at least. This isn't actually spiritual. This is just how the world works. The world works on this subtle level. So what tends to happen is that the Atma is really excited about what's going on in the mind. It's our show. It's like watching a constant movie. It's a drama in front of us. And we don't want just to be the audience. We want to get involved. We want to be the center actor in this drama. We want things happening to us. We want to change things in such a way that we're getting more and more out of it. We're doing well, don't worry. So we start to invest ourselves in that. Like you would invest yourself in a drama, in a movie. You want to be there. You want to feel what they're feeling. You want to kind of give yourself to it. So we identify deeper and deeper and deeper. So deep that in the Atma no longer thinks of itself as being the observer, detached from the mind, the body and the world, but sees itself completely as this new self who is, and that self is generated as an image in our mind. I am this body, I am male, I am this age, I am this type, this activity, these are my skills, these are my interests. This is a self created here. And we engage in that, looking after that self for the whole of our life. What's this self interested in? What does it want? What is it trying to get? That becomes our material life. However, what we need to do is to understand that the mind and the world, body and brain, they're all part of one domain, the domain of time. But that the Atma is outside time. You observe time. You have observed time since I started this talk. Time has moved on. You are still the same person, observing when I started. And now, you are the same person when you were a little kid. Of course, your mind, your body, your kind of views, all this, the mental stuff has changed. But you as the observer never changed. You observe the passing of time. You are outside of time. Time changes the world. It moves it. It changes stuff in the mind. But you remain constant. That's one of the first messages of the Bhagavad Gita, isn't it? Krishna starts out with Arjuna. So, This is the domain of pure consciousness. Now, what we're actually suggesting in spiritual life is that initially we realize, wait a minute, I am not this self that I think I am. I am the spirit. I am the Atma. I'm a being of consciousness. So initially we give ourselves a kind of selfhood of a spiritual being. Initially it's still a construct in our mind. But from that we're able to kind of define our desires, our interests, our motivations in a way that is consistent with the reality of being a conscious being. When we just think, I am this body, I am the material self, we give ourselves to that. When we see ourselves as the spiritual self, we define our activities in order to be conducive to that identity. That is called dharma. Dharma is acting conducive to your real self. And when you do that, your influence then spreads to the world. It is shown in compassion. It is shown in your desire for harmony, for creating peace, as you all are today. It starts to manifest in that outreach view. But then, one last aspect of this, that in that state, the Atma can continue to develop. And it turns its attention to the domain of pure consciousness, and particularly to identifying the source of unified consciousness. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Now it's time to look for the absolute truth. What is that absolute truth? Jan Madhyasya Yataha. That from which everything else emanates. And again, this is an absolute agreement we can have with anybody. There is no one in this world who doesn't think that all of existence comes from something. It's just a question of what that something is. But we all know there must be some source from which everything else comes. So the only question for human beings is that source of existence, that source of everything else, is it inert, non-sentient, or is it sentient, conscious? That's the question. Now, because of the analysis I've just done, it's very hard for me to see how matter, something inert, can produce consciousness. Therefore, my tendency would be to think this source must also be conscious as I am. It's easy to see how something conscious might produce something inert, but the opposite just seems ridiculous. I know lots of people believe that consciousness, we heard, is consciousness an epiphenomenon of matter? You know, people believe that. But it's very hard. Therefore, if this source is conscious, if it's aware, if it has its own perspective, then there is a chance that I can connect with that source personally. That becomes then another source of inspiration, of intuition, of insight, of knowledge. And that is the process of yoga, connecting with the source of our existence. And particularly the process of bhakti is to connect with the source of our existence, not just in knowledge, but in love, in bhakti, in devotion. So the hope is that this model actually resolves many of the issues facing science, facing philosophy, and hopefully creates a framework that actually can be used, as we've said, it was said earlier by other speakers, you know, doesn't matter, you can put any religion into this. You know, we're not arguing with any other religion. We're not arguing with any other philosophy. Any other philosophy can be held and accommodated within this. But this offers at least reassurance that if you have this inkling that spiritual life is important to you, that you wish to make progress on it, the reality is there for you. The processes are available. They're described. And that each one of us, according to our own desire, can make as much and as quick progress towards a spiritual destination as we would like. And in that way, perhaps do a lot of good for the world. I'm just going to finish with this last statement from Bhagavad Gita, and it's not 1333, it's 9.2. This science is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of spirituality and religion. It is everlasting and is joyfully performed. Deepa, in your introduction, you were talking about going from pessimistic speculation to optimistic realization. That's what this verse is about. Realization, perfection, which is everlasting, joyful. I don't think you can get more optimistic realization than that. Thank you very much.
Yes, wonderful. I personally liked it a lot, the way you took us through the physical, mental, and then even deeper. Slowly you were revealing, more and more, and at the end it made like a perfect picture. Thank you so much, personally, from my side also. So if anyone have any question, please come forward. I think we need to process this, it was so nice. It takes like some processes to understand, and then, yeah. But it was really nice. There is one question. Sometimes it takes a few seconds to also formulate the question. Yes, please, ma'am.
When you say that physical entity and mind, where the thoughts comes, and Atma, so where is the emotions?
Emotions are stirred within the mind. Basically, the mind reacts to the circumstances it's been fed, and it's looking, how will I respond to that? So really, the ups and downs of our emotions are generated within the mind. It's like if you watch a movie and you see there's a happy scene. You're watching, you become happy. Then there's a sad scene, you become sad. But actually, nothing has changed about you watching the movie. You're sitting there enjoying your popcorn, But your emotions have gone up and down by identifying with what is being shown to you. So for most of the time, our emotions are being generated within the mind. However, the reason that we identify with emotions within the mind is because consciousness at the Atma contains its own emotions. But in order to explore those emotions, they need to be stirred by real love.
So emotions of Atma and emotions of mind, they both will be together, and then you will see that this is the real emotions of that picture.
What Krishna is encouraging Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita is to stop identifying with the emotions of the mind. There's so much, be detached. Don't tolerate the ups and downs. Be like the lake, the pond that's always filling but never disturbed. Once you get the mind under control like that, then the Atma can experience real emotions of its own. It's like if you're watching a film, you're not really experiencing your own emotions about your own life. You're experiencing the emotions that have been stirred by something else. So you have to step away from that.
So it means one intelligence is you are seeing the picture, and second, real intelligence that comes from your Atma.
Real intelligence is a supportive role that actually Krishna plays as Param Atma. The Sankhya idea is that there is mind, mana, and that's the thing that's accepting, rejecting, coming up with all sorts of ideas. Higher than that, and I think it was, I can't remember whose slide it was in, it showed
above the mind is intelligence. That intelligence is a higher function, which we might think is our own intelligence, and it is helping to control the mind. But actually, that higher intelligence is a gift from God.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. A big round of applause for Martin Fleming and such a nice presentation.